At 74, Stevie Wonder sits at a place in music history that few can ever reach, a living legend whose voice, songs, and message have stretched across generations. But behind the legend of Stevie Wonder lies a story deeply entwined with Motown, the record label that discovered him, shaped him, challenged him, and at times even constrained him. For decades, he was careful with his words about Motown, praising its legacy, its founder Berry Gordy, and the family of musicians who built it. But as the years have gone by, Stevie has opened the door wider, offering his real thoughts about those early years, the triumphs, the struggles, and the battles that defined his career and shaped modern soul music. What he reveals about Motown is not only the story of one artist, but of an entire era in American culture where music, race, money, and freedom collided in ways that still echo today. The beginning of Stevie's story with Motown goes back to 1961, when an 11-year-old blind boy from Saginaw, Michigan, was brought into the orbit of Berry Gordy's growing musical empire. Born Stevland Hardaway Judkins, later known as Stevland Morris, Stevie had already shown signs of extraordinary talent, mastering instruments and performing with a maturity that belied his years. When Ronnie White of the Miracles introduced him to Gordy, there was something electric in the air. Stevie was quickly signed to Motown's Tamla label, and almost immediately he was branded as Little Stevie Wonder. The nickname was more than marketing. It was a statement to the world that this was a child prodigy unlike any other. But even from the start, Stevie later admitted, there was a conflict between being the label's young novelty act and his own burning desire to be taken seriously as a musician. By 1963, Stevie had his first major hit with Fingertips Part 2, a live recording that captured his wild harmonica playing and infectious energy. It shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him, at just 13 years old, the youngest artist ever to top the chart. Motown celebrated, Gordy saw a goldmine, and Stevie was launched into stardom. But with that success came limitations. Motown was a label that prided itself on a tight system. Songs were written and produced by in-house teams like Holland Dozier Holland. Image was carefully controlled, and artists were expected to follow the formula. For a teenager like Stevie, the rules felt suffocating. Over the years, Stevie would reflect that while he owed his breakthrough to Motown, the label also kept him in a box during those early years, pushing him toward pop novelty songs rather than allowing him to explore the full depths of his artistry. Then came the late 1960s, and with it both change and tension. As Stevie grew into adulthood, the world around him was shifting. The civil rights movement was reshaping America, Black pride and self-expression were rising, and music itself was breaking free from strict formulas. Stevie wanted to write about love, about politics, about spirituality, subjects that Motown wasn't always eager to support. He was inspired by Marvin Gaye, who had begun to push against Motown's constraints with songs that were socially conscious and deeply personal. Stevie later admitted that he admired Marvin's courage to demand creative control, and he too began fighting for the same. This was a turning point in his relationship with Motown, a battle that would shape the next phase of his career. In 1971, everything changed when Stevie turned 21 and his original Motown contract expired. For the first time in a decade, Stevie Wonder was free, and he used that moment to send a clear message. He was no longer little Stevie, no longer just the child prodigy on harmonica. He was a man, an artist, and he wanted full creative control. Berry Gordy, knowing Stevie's talent and his commercial power, feared losing him. The negotiation that followed was intense, but Stevie held firm. He studied music technology, learned the possibilities of the synthesizer, and began recording independently. When he finally re-signed with Motown, it was under a revolutionary contract, one that gave him unprecedented control over his music, his publishing, and his production. Few artists in Motown history had ever managed such freedom. It was the beginning of what Stevie later called his classic period, where he released a run of albums that remain among the greatest in music history. From 1972's Music of My Mind to Talking Book, Innervisions, and Songs in the Key of Life, Stevie was unstoppable. Each album broke new ground, blending soul, funk, jazz, and electronic sounds in ways nobody had ever attempted. Songs like Superstition, Living for the City, and Sir Duke weren't just hits, they were statements, works of art that reflected Stevie's own vision of the world. And in interviews later in life, Stevie admitted that this creative explosion would never have happened if he hadn't fought Motown for freedom. "I had to take control of my life, of my music," he once said. "Otherwise, I would have been just another artist singing songs someone else wrote for me." That statement reveals the tension at the heart of his relationship with Motown, gratitude for the platform, but also frustration at the limitations that came with it. Yet Stevie's revelations about Motown weren't just about business. He spoke often about the sense of family that Motown created, The camaraderie of artists like Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and the Jackson 5, all working within a system that felt both competitive and supportive. He described the famous Motown Review Tour, where young artists learned the discipline of live performance and the lessons from Motown's in-house finishing school, which taught them how to handle interviews, how to dress, how to move on stage. Stevie credited those experiences with giving him the foundation to become a global performer. But at the same time, he admitted that the polish sometimes came at the expense of authenticity. "They wanted us to be perfect," Stevie once reflected, "but real music isn't always perfect. Real music is about feeling." Then came 1976, the year Stevie Wonder released Songs in the Key of Life. To this day, it is considered his masterpiece, a double album that captured the full spectrum of human experience, from the joy of Isn't She Lovely to the social urgency of Village Ghetto Land. The album won Grammy Awards, topped charts worldwide, and cemented Stevie's place as one of the greatest artists of all time. And yet, even at this peak, Stevie was mindful of his place in the Motown story. He later revealed that Motown initially doubted the massive scope of the project, worried it was too ambitious, too expensive, too unconventional. But Stevie insisted, and history proved him right. It was a moment that symbolized his entire journey with the label. Motown tried to contain him, but Stevie's vision was bigger than the system itself. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Stevie had become more than just a Motown artist. He was a global icon, using his platform to push for social change, from campaigning to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday to writing songs that addressed poverty, inequality, and hope. And in reflecting on Motown, Stevie often pointed out that while the label gave black artists opportunities in a segregated America, it was still a business at the end of the day. He acknowledged Berry Gordy's brilliance as a businessman, but also admitted that Motown, like many institutions, sometimes prioritized profit over artistic freedom. It was this duality, gratitude mixed with critique, that defined Stevie's later revelations about Motown. As the 1980s rolled in, Stevie Wonder found himself navigating both his own legacy and the changing tides of Motown. The label that had once defined black music and shaped pop culture was beginning to struggle. Disco had taken over in the late 70s, new sounds were emerging, and Motown's formula no longer dominated the charts as it once had. Stevie, however, remained relevant, pushing boundaries with projects like Hotter Than July, which carried the anthem Happy Birthday, his powerful call to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Stevie would later speak about how Motown executives weren't always eager to back such politically charged work, fearing it could alienate certain audiences. But Stevie persisted, and eventually the song became a cornerstone in the movement to establish the King holiday. It was a reminder of how his vision often outgrew the cautious instincts of Motown's leadership. Stevie later reflected that Motown, for all its brilliance, often underestimated just how powerful music could be when it carried a message beyond entertainment. In his words, music wasn't just about making people dance or selling records. It was about touching the spirit, healing the soul, and changing the world. He credited his time with Motown for teaching him the mechanics of the business, but he also admitted that he had to step beyond Motown's boundaries to fully embrace music as a vehicle for justice and change. The label had launched him, but it was his willingness to push back against the label that allowed him to become the artist we know today. By the mid-1980s, Motown itself was changing hands. In 1988, Berry Gordy sold the company to MCA Records and Boston Ventures, marking the end of an era. Stevie was deeply affected by this shift. Motown had been more than just a label. It had been a cultural movement, a family, a force of pride for Black America. When Gordy let go of it, Stevie later remarked that it felt like a piece of history was lost. He understood the financial realities, but emotionally, he confessed, it was painful to see the house that built him pass into corporate ownership. For Stevie, this was a turning point in how he talked about Motown. No longer was it just the place that had launched his career. Now it was a symbol of both triumph and loss, of how something born from Black creativity and resilience could be swallowed by the machinery of the music industry. Then in 1989, Stevie was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In his speech, he thanked Berry Gordy and Motown, but he also spoke passionately about the need for artists to control their own destinies. Those words were not accidental. They were a direct reflection of his journey with Motown, a journey from being a child star molded by the system to becoming a man who bent the system to his will. Over and over, Stevie has repeated that the most important lesson he learned from Motown was both how to succeed within it and how to break free from it. It was this duality that made him unique among his Motown peers. Then came the year 1996, when Stevie performed at the closing ceremony of the Atlanta Olympics. His music once again reached billions worldwide, reminding everyone of his timeless genius. Around this time, journalists pressed him about his reflections on Motown now that decades had passed. Stevie's answer was telling. He said that Motown would always be a part of him, like family. But he also compared it to growing up in a strict household. You love your parents, you're grateful to them, but at some point you need to move out and live your own life. That metaphor summed up everything. Motown was the house that raised him, but he had to leave it in order to truly find himself. As the new millennium began, Stevie Wonder's commentary on Motown became even more nuanced. He took part in documentaries, tributes, and interviews that revisited the label's history. In each, he balanced celebration with candor. He praised the Motown assembly line for creating excellence, but he also questioned whether it stifled individuality. He shared stories of recording late into the night at Hitsville, USA, the legendary Motown studio, experimenting with sounds that sometimes frustrated the label executives who just wanted another hit single. He remembered Berry Gordy telling him to keep things simple, to not overthink. And yet, Stevie insisted on complexity, on layering sounds, on creating music that wasn't just disposable but timeless. That clash of philosophies, simplicity versus innovation, defined his personal struggle within Motown. Then in 2003, Stevie returned to Motown for a special occasion, the 45th anniversary celebration of the label. By then, Motown was no longer the powerhouse it once was, but its legacy loomed large. Stevie performed, shared memories, and honored the journey. But afterward, he was asked once again what Motown truly meant to him, and in his answer, he revealed the full depth of his feelings. Motown was magic, he said, but magic can be tricky. It dazzles you, it inspires you, but it can also distract you from the truth. The truth is, artists need freedom. Without freedom, magic eventually fades. That single statement captured the essence of Stevie Wonder's revelations about Motown. He loved it, he honored it, he recognized it as the foundation of his success. But he also understood its flaws, its limitations, and the ways it had held him back. And unlike many artists who left Motown bitter, Stevie managed to transform his relationship with the label into something more complex, an acknowledgement of both gratitude and critique, of love and independence. By the 2010s, as Stevie entered his later years, he became more reflective about his role in the Motown story. He gave lengthy interviews where he spoke about Berry Gordy almost like a father figure, demanding, brilliant, but not always easy to live with. He recalled moments of laughter, moments of conflict, and moments of triumph. And in these stories, one theme always returned: the importance of fighting for your own voice. Stevie believed that the reason his music from the 1970s still resonates is because it was truly his own, not the product of a committee or a formula. Motown gave him the platform, but he gave himself the freedom. That, he insisted, was the lesson every artist needed to learn. Then in 2019, at the Motown 60th anniversary celebration, Stevie once again took the stage. Decades after Fingertips, decades after his battles for freedom, he stood as one of the last living pillars of the Motown dynasty. His speech that night was emotional. He praised Gordy, he honored his fellow artists, but he also urged young musicians to take control of their futures. He told them not to settle for what labels wanted, not to be boxed in, but to chase their own visions. It was, in many ways, Stevie Wonder's final word on Motown, a tribute and a warning, a celebration and a lesson. Stevie would often begin his recollections with the early days, the awe of walking into Hitsville, USA in Detroit, hearing the hum of activity, the sound of musicians rehearsing, and the sense that something historic was happening. He described how the building itself seemed to vibrate with creativity. Yet even in those nostalgic moments, Stevie acknowledged that the system was rigid. He remembered being told what to sing, how to act, and how to present himself. At the time, he obeyed, but deep down he knew that music could not be reduced to instructions. Looking back decades later, Stevie admitted that the strictness of Motown nearly broke his spirit at times. "They wanted me to be an act," he said, "but I wanted to be an artist." That tension, he explained, was the key to understanding both his struggles and his triumphs. Then came the stories of money. Motown, for all its success, was notorious for paying artists far less than they deserved. Stevie admitted that as a teenager, he had little understanding of contracts, royalties, and publishing rights. He trusted that the label would take care of him. But as he grew older, he realized that much of his early earnings had been absorbed by the system. He didn't dwell on bitterness, but he didn't shy away from the truth either. Motown was a business, and like many businesses, it put profit above fairness. Stevie's breakthrough contract at 21 was as much an act of rebellion as it was a survival tactic. "If I hadn't fought for control," he once said, "I would have been rich in fame but poor in everything else." His candor about money was striking, because it revealed how even the most successful Motown stars had to claw for their rights. Yet Stevie's revelations were never simply about criticism. He also celebrated the camaraderie, the sense of competition that pushed everyone to be better. He told stories of watching Marvin Gaye in the studio, of trading musical ideas with Smokey Robinson, of witnessing Michael Jackson's rise. He called Motown a musical university, where you learn not just how to make hits but how to perform, how to communicate, how to move people's hearts. He credited those years with giving him discipline, a respect for craft, and a belief in the power of community. It was this balance, acknowledging both the exploitation and the empowerment, that made Stevie's perspective so unique. As Stevie grew older, his honesty deepened. He began speaking openly about the loneliness that came with being a child star at Motown. Surrounded by adults, constantly on the road, he often felt isolated. He admitted that he missed parts of his childhood because of the pressure to perform. And yet, he also acknowledged that music gave him a purpose, a sense of mission that replaced what he lost. In these reflections, one can sense both gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the opportunities, sorrow for the innocence that was taken away. Then came the reflections on legacy. Stevie often said that his proudest achievement was not just his music, but the fact that he fought for creative freedom within Motown and won. That victory, he explained, set an example for future generations. Artists like Prince, Michael Jackson, and countless others took note of Stevie's insistence on control, and they too demanded ownership of their art. In this way, Stevie's battle with Motown had ripple effects far beyond his own career. It reshaped the industry itself, proving that artists could be more than employees. They could be visionaries who dictated the terms. By the time he reached his 70s, Stevie spoke of Motown almost like one speaks of an old relationship, filled with passion, conflict, joy, and pain. He no longer hid the contradictions. He loved Motown, but he also outgrew it. He was proud of it, but he was also critical of it. And in revealing those truths, he gave fans a fuller picture of what it meant to be part of the Motown machine. He didn't want the story to be sanitized. He wanted people to understand that greatness often comes with struggle, that even the most magical institutions are flawed, and that true artistry requires breaking chains, even if they are gilded. In the end, Stevie Wonder's revelations about Motown remind us of something universal, that greatness often requires struggle, that freedom is never given but must be claimed, and that art flourishes when it is honest. His journey through Motown was a journey through America itself, through its injustices and its triumphs, through its dreams and its contradictions. And at 74, when Stevie Wonder finally opened up, what he gave us was not just a history lesson, but a blueprint for resilience, independence, and truth. Because in the end, Stevie's story is the story of Motown itself, a story of magic and control, of brilliance and limitation, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. And in finally revealing it, Stevie Wonder did what he has always done best. He told the truth through his voice, a truth that will echo long after the last note fades.